Yes, well, I'm Janet Ellen Parker. I was born on a hop farm at Froom's Hill called the Spon End, and eventually got married and moved to Hopton Solars, Stoke Lacey, and I'm now in a bungalow called Solars Hill, and it's still in Stoke Lacey. Yeah, I'll start off with getting ready for hop picking.
Yeah. So just describe that one, and remember, because I'm not going to be in the camera, so just as if you're telling it for the first time, you've not met me before.
Right.
I'm ready.
Yeah. Well, hop picking was the highlight of our year. My sister and I, we used to look forward to the hop pickers coming from Worcester every year and meet up with the same families. And of course, when they came, we had to get ready for we used to get ready for their blankets for them. And we also used to sew on the hessian for the cribs with a long pointed needle, which used to sew up the eventual pocket. We used to sew on the hessian onto the cribs. And then the cribs were taken down into the hop yard before the first day. And then they were put into what they call a house. The house was decided by the poles in the hop yard, really. Every 2 poles, I think it was, was a house, and then when they'd picked the house, they'd move on to another house, and so it went on until the hops were picked.
Now, you were a booker.
Mm.
So, do you want Janet to hold the book?
I think we could do that another time.
Okay.
Yeah, a bit
So,
later.
tell us, Janet, because I don't know, just using your recollection,
Yeah.
what is a booker and what did you do?
Right, well, when they picked the hops into the cribs were sort of partitioned into 2. One half for one person, the other half for another. And then when they were ready, they'd been picked. The busheler came along and used this round basket and put the bushels into what they called the green sacks. 2 men, which was Cyril Goodchap, which came to us when he was 14, and in fact he stayed with us all his working life, and he still lives in Bromyard now. He's 89. But anyway, him and Bill Davis, another workman of ours, they used to hold the green sacks. Bill in fact used to do the busheling, and I was the booker, or Mary or my mum usually first, I expect, and then Mary's turn, and then my turn came, and we used to write down in the book, the hop measurer's book, the amount of bushels they'd had, and then they also had a little book, a thinner book, and they kept their bushels in there, so they knew how many bushels they'd got and what price. Well, of course, sometimes there used to be strikes, not very often, but I remember several strikes. If they got the idea that another farmer was paying more, that they would go on strike, and then Dad would have to pay them a bit more. But anyway, that's how it went. They usually settled the strikes quite easily. And then the hops were taken then up to the farm and put on the green stage. And then they were waiting to go on the hop kills. They were on the 2nd story, the hop kills. They worked for us. Yeah, shall I start again? You say when you're starting.
Yeah, you go for it. Yeah.
Well, Cyril Goodchap and Bill Davis, they worked for us as long as I can remember. They started. Cyril, in fact, came to us when he was 14. He left school at 14 and came to work for us. He was a neighbouring farmer's son, and in fact he lived at Woodcroft, the neighbouring farm, but he worked at the Spon End all his working life, really. Bill Davis, he lived down, well, not far from us, but yes, he worked for us. I think he worked for us all his life, as long as I can remember anyway. And his wife, Mrs. Davis, used to work in the house for Mum. Yeah, that was enough for them, isn't it?
Lovely.
I didn't say about Cyril. Still working for us at 89, did I? But anyway, he's still in Bromyard.
Mm-hmm.
Did I say that?
Did Janet say that?
No, I don't think you did.
That would be good.
That's
Yeah.
nice. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, when you're
Yeah.
ready, Janet.
Well, when Cyril came to us at 14, he worked for us all his working life. In fact, he used to visit my sister Mary. In fact, he still does on a Friday. Very often he goes up to see her now. He's 89 now and lives in Bromyard.
You were, tell us about the ganger.
Oh yeah, Mrs. Sutton, yeah. Mrs. Sutton was the ganger lady. I think her husband used to work on the little boats in the Severn in Worcester, River Severn. But anyway, she used to be the ganger lady, and she would negotiate with Dad the amount of, the price of the bushels for the year. And she would get the people together and, well, find the pickers for us really, and she was in charge. And she was in charge of the pickers. In fact, she was the ganger lady. So if there was any disputes or anything like that, they went to her, and her and Dad usually discussed it and settled any dispute that there was, yeah. They used to get together in the evenings. They all used to, there was a contraption called a devil, and it was like a fire with coke or anthracite on, and they used to cook in the evenings, you know, put everything in the big pot and just have a good sing-song, and they really enjoyed their times out on the farms. Yeah, they really did. The hop kilns, the hops were taken up and put on the green stage, and that was the next stage. Was they were loaded onto the kilns, which was done about every, I think it took 8 hours to dry a load of hops. They were usually had to be 140 degrees, and the fire was stoked. Well, first of all, when they put them on, they had to load. They loaded the kilns, and then they lit sulphur underneath. Well, that was a very dangerous job, lighting the sulphur. They put the sulphur in a pan, and they put it underneath the hops at a lower level, and then they put methylated spirits on, and they lit it with a match. Well, unfortunately, a friend of ours, quite a younger friend actually, he thought the sulphur used to take quite a long time to light, and this one time he thought it hadn't lit, and so he went to put some more more methylated spirits on, and it blew back up at the bottle, and he was very badly burnt. In fact, he died after 3 weeks. So it really was a very precarious job for the hop dryer. But anyway, back to the hops. They were on the kiln for about 8 hours, and they would be unloaded then into another room where they cooled down before they were eventually put into a pocket. Well, the bagger was the person that put the hops into the pocket, which was about 6 foot long, and it was in a hole about 18 inches across. And so the bagger was the person really that pressed the hops into the pocket, and it was his job to get as near to 1.5 hundredweight as he could, because that was really the max, about what you should have in a hop pocket. And then they were lowered down then, and the farmer's name was put on. They were sewed up with the same needle that we used to put on with the cribs, the hessian onto the cribs. And then the farmer's name was put on, and the date and the number of the hop pocket, and so that's when you knew that was all the information that they wanted on the pocket. And then that was stored then until they were taken away to the brewery, well, to the hop factors, who then sampled the pockets, and we used to go up to London and see the samples very often. The hop factors then told you how much you had for your pockets, and that was it.
Ready whenever you are, Janet.
Yeah, the kiln bed, yeah. Well, you see, my father, they didn't used to go to bed at all during the 3 weeks or a month when they were hop picking or hop drying. But they had a bed made up of hop pockets, really, and made it cosy so that you could see the fire. And they had to put on, in the old days, they used to have to put on the coke, about every 20 minutes or half an hour to keep the fire going. And they had this bed, which he used to lie on and have a nap. Well, of course, Mary and I, we absolutely loved going down into the kiln bed, and we used to roast potatoes and things like that in the ashes. Yeah, it was quite exciting. Yeah, well, this is the hop measurer's book for the Spon End, and this is from 1947. This is my mother's handwriting, and I think we worked out they were 1 and 2pence a bushel. I'm looking through, I can see a lot of these names. Mrs. Sutton there, she was the ganger lady, and Joan Goodchap, she was Cyril's sister actually. She used to walk across from their farm. In fact, a lot of these, another Miss Goodchap, I think that was Ruth, and Mrs. Patterson, these are all people from Froomes Hill that used to come down. But most of these, well, a lot of them, were from Worcester, and these were the ones that used to stay on the farm. Yeah. Yeah.
And right, we're ready to go.
Yeah, okay, yeah, well, these are some of the hop measuring books that we had. That's 1955. This is a hop measuring book from the Spon End. This is 1947. This is my mother's handwriting. And these are the people. This is Mrs. Sutton, who was our ganger lady. And then Joan Goodchap, she was Cyril's sister actually, from our neighbouring farm. Then there's Miss Goodchap, that was Ruth, that was an older sister. These are people actually from Froomes Hill. But there were people from Worcester, like Bob Hustle. In fact, he used to live in the buildings all year round. And just to do odd jobs on the farm like they used to. There's Mary Davis again, she was from Froomes Hill.
Can we go back to Bob, Janet, and can you just explain what all the different columns are? Because it's like...
Oh, right, yeah.
Because you remember, just...
yeah.
So just point out each individual column.
Yeah, well, this is Bob Hustle. Now, this is September the 4th. Well, in the morning, when they bushelled in the morning, about 12 o'clock, Bill Davis would come around and say, clear them up, and they'd pick all the leaves out then, because you didn't want any leaves in the samples, and so he had 3 then. Well, then again, so the crib would be empty, so they'd start again. They'd come around about 4 o'clock, or 5 o'clock, about 5 o'clock really, and then he'd have 4 bushels. So obviously he wasn't what you call a really good picker. See, there's one here, Doris Teal, she was a neighbour of ours. I mean, on a Saturday morning. Well, on a Saturday morning, she probably had a visitor, you see, so she's got 11 there, which is unusual because she had on the 4th and the 5th, she had 6. And on the 8th and 9th, she had 6 and 7. So I would imagine probably her mother or her sister came.
Could you talk a little bit about how much people were paid and show me in the book as well? Because that was fascinating.
Yeah, well, let me look at that page.
Some of these children don't know anything about old money, do they?
Oh, they don't. Well, to be quite honest, I was going to look. I think was it in that book? There was. Oh, which book had got the one with? Oh, this was the one that had. It was number 46, I think. It was.
Rick, I can go down into this column.
Yep, just go all the way. Yep.
Okay.
What was the one I had?
Just as an example, really.
Yeah, it was an example, wasn't it? Yeah. Yeah, well. Yeah, well, this is another book. For instance, this is Mrs. Southall. She was from Froomes Hill. But it looks here as if they picked up to the 9th and then they decided that wasn't enough money. Well, we work out here. I worked out actually, it was 1 and 2pence a bushel. And then they must have had more, but I haven't worked out quite what that is. It's difficult really, working out really 1 and 2pence a bushel in old money, because it was 12 pennies to a shilling, 20 shillings to the pound. Yeah, well, they picked from obviously the 6th to the 10th, and they were 1 and 2pence a bushel, we worked out, and then they must have gone on strike. Well, whether that was a Saturday or if they didn't pick that day, I can't remember, but they obviously would have more, they would be offered more, so it was probably 1 and 3pence, I would think. Yeah, well, you can see here that they picked up until the 10th, and they had 59 bushels. Well, obviously they must have got together with other pickers from other farms and found out that we weren't paying enough. So they must have, Mrs. Sutton would have come to Dad and said, well, look, this isn't enough. We shall probably go back to Worcester if you can't pay us more. So I expect after a lot of hassle, he would probably up the price a bit. What it is there, to be quite honest, I can't work out at the moment. But that's what happened. They would argue with him and he would probably ring round and find from other farmers how much they were paying and pay the same. Right, yeah, well, payday was quite a big day, really, because it was a matter of going and getting the money from the bank and sort of getting it back without anybody seeing it. And Father would be in the front room and count it all out as if, see it was correct. And they, in their turn, would come and take their money. A lot of them during the season would sub. That means they'd take money and go up the pub of a night time, and some wouldn't have much money at the end of the season, but others would have quite a bit. And it was great excitement. On the actual finish, when we'd finished picking, all the men and the boys and used to crib the girls and try and get them in the cribs. And Dad used to think, oh goodness me, I hope they're not going to break too many cribs this year, because it means mending them for next. And we had a lot of fun. A lot of drink was consumed. A lot of drink, and it was great fun actually. And of course, after they'd gone, the hop pickers, it was very quiet. And Bill Davis one year, he always did grow marrows on a mud tump. And one year he went the day after they'd gone, and all his marrows had gone too. Of course, they thought they were ours, really, but so the next year when they came back, oh, what did the boss say about the marrows? And Bill wasn't very pleased. He said, well, they weren't his, they were mine. So it was quite hilarious, really.
Give us a clue. Tell us what it was like.
Yeah, well, really, hop picking, which every farm really in Herefordshire had a few hops, and it was more like a closed shop because it was such a full-on job that people would take their holidays for 3 weeks and come and work in the hops. But unless you were actually in the kilns, you wouldn't realise, people that hadn't got hops wouldn't realise what was going on unless they visited just to have a look, which really you didn't want visitors at that time of year, except perhaps in the kilns at night, which was quite fun actually. All right. Was that not enough?
Oh, do you want a bit more?
Yeah, I mean, almost like you're talking to a 10-year-old child that...
Did you know like your grandchildren, they have no idea what you lived through and what
No,
you're
they
like.
haven't got a clue.
So
But they don't want to know. I don't think they want to know.
Yeah, I'm sure,
Well, not now. I think it's when
Yeah.
they're older, they'll
Yeah.
be interested. So
Yeah.
if you could, say, talk to your grandchildren now in 20 years, how would you describe it? Because your
I've got to
children...
think about that because,
It's very different from now, isn't
yeah,
it?
very, yeah.
I mean, because you had horse-powered machinery, didn't you?
Yeah,
And,
yeah.
No cars, you used to ride your ponies.
That's
up the
right,
road,
yes,
didn't you?
yes.
And
We didn't have holidays every 5 minutes either.
no, that's what you were saying. You were saying that to me
differences.
before.
Yeah,
that
well,
your
I mean, my grandchildren, I mean, they've been all over. They've been in America, but I mean, we never used to have holidays.
No.
We used to have days out, but not holidays,
That's
really.
right,
Yeah. No. Yeah, well, really, I mean, we didn't have the holidays like they do nowadays. I mean, a day out at the seaside was quite a big thing. In fact, my father, he never came on holiday with us. I don't ever remember him coming on holiday with us. His holiday was the trumpet, really. He lived for the trumpet, the ploughing, because he was a ploughman. And they used to go and they used to mark out the ground on the Tuesday, and then they sort of get ready a bit more on the Wednesday, and on the Thursday the trumpet ploughing match took place. Well, then he would go with a friend and they'd walk every acre of ploughing just to compare it with how they judged it. Yeah, because he never judged there because he was the local. He wasn't allowed to judge.
That's fascinating.
Fantastic,
Yeah.
isn't it? Well, I think, do you want to tell us a little bit about the hop competition in those days at the ploughing match when your father went? Because you said there were many
Yeah.
more people
Oh,
there.
yeah.
Can you tell us?
I mean, the trumpet ploughing match was, it's a very well-known ploughing match. Really, I should imagine, second after the national. It's always been, whether they've had horse ploughing. In fact, even now they have horse ploughing. They had 6, I think, this year. Last year they had 12. And the hops, there was such a competition between the hops where now, I mean, there weren't so many varieties in those days, but there was more entries. And oh yeah, it was a great thing to have a prize there. Was quite a big thing, really.
Yeah. Was there anything that your dad used to say that showed you just how competitive that? Because a lot of the farmers, because John was saying that he liked a bit of competition. Really, was there anything like that with your
I
father?
don't think there was, but he just loved ploughing. My dad, yeah, he absolutely loved ploughing. It was his life, really. Yeah.
Can you describe the caravan, the family that arrived?
When we were at the hill, the Dixons used to come with their Romany caravan. It was very ornate, and they had beautiful china and very polished brasses, and it used to be towed by a brown and white horse. But the Dixons, they never sort of mixed with the other pickers in the evenings. They always kept to themselves. Yeah.
You mentioned in here about looking forward to all the other families coming at hop picking. Can you describe?
Yeah, us when we were little. Yeah. Yeah, well, when we were little, we used to look forward to the families, the same families coming every year. So, I mean, sometimes they'd have another baby and or somebody, you know, got a different boyfriend. They weren't so many couples really in those days, but I think a lot of the local lads used to fancy a lot of the girls that used to come.
Oh, there's a story. There's a story.
Do you know, I mean, you know Janet and her sister are married to brothers.
Yeah, that
Yeah.
was good.
It's
Yeah.
quite nice. It's quite nice. Do you want to? And it's,
Well, yeah, well, that's sort of more recent, that is, yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, well, I married a hop farmer in 1957, John Parker. My sister was my bridesmaid, and John's brother was his best man. And when we came off honeymoon, they'd started going out together, and they married the next year in April. Yeah. Oh, we used to have a lovely ice cream. People used to come. They were called the Cotswold Dairies, and they were the most beautiful ice cream. I don't think I've ever tasted such nice ice cream since. Mrs. Brace used to come with her fish. I remember we had a Cocker Spaniel, and she held up a fish one day, and he grabbed it and it went down his throat, and she pulled it back out and put it back on the slab, or in the back of the van, and yeah, I think, and we used to have Jehovah's Witnesses and. Yeah, lots of visitors. Yeah, great fun actually. Oh yeah,
Yes.
yeah. But this was a dog. Yeah.
Nearly died. Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's just try
Let me
that.
just think of the first. Oh, the Cotswold ice cream. Do you want me to say that again?
Yeah.
Start that again.
That'd be lovely.
Yeah, yeah. Yes, I remember the Cotswold Dairy ice cream. They used to come into the hop yard quite a lot. In fact, they were the most beautiful ice creams. I don't think I've ever tasted such nice ice creams as those. Mrs. Brace used to come with the fish van. She held up a fish one day, and our Cocker Spaniel, Rusty, he jumped up and grabbed it. It went halfway down his throat, but anyway, she pulled it back out and put it back on the slab. Nobody was any the wiser, so I expect she sold it. We used to get Jehovah's Witnesses, and lots of visitors in the afternoons would come and help pick. Yes, when we moved down, when my auntie Nan died, Miss Clues, A.E. Clues. She died, unfortunately, in 1950. Well, hang on, I'm going to start that again. I've got forgotten when it was. 1950. Yeah, this is it. Yeah, I'll start again. Okay.
Yeah.
Our lives were shattered, really, in 1953 when Mum's sister, Annie Elizabeth Clues, she died of cancer in the infirmary at Worcester, the Royal Infirmary. And so Mum and I, we moved down to the hill because at that time her dad had retired and come to live with her. And also she had prisoners of war. At that time she had a German living in called Otto Berlin. And so we immediately went down to live at the hill with Grandad. And Mary and Dad stayed at the Spon End until after hop picking. And then they moved down to the hill and we let the Spon End farmhouse.
Oh, that's good.
Did the POW help with the hop harvest?
Oh yeah, he lived in the house.
Oh yeah, we need that.
So I think you need
To say that.
say
Yeah,
yeah.
just a bit of detail.
Yeah.
Yeah. Where shall I start from then? Well,
Well, the POW was called, and he lived
Yeah.
in the house, and
This is what you did.
yeah. Yes, when Mum and I moved down to the hill, because my granddad had already moved in with my aunt, and she also had prisoners of war. She had an Italian, first of all, if I remember rightly, and then she had this German living in, Otto Berlin, so of course they had to be looked after and cooked for. Yes, they were, she always had prisoners of war, don't know why, but yes, she did. Don't know why she had them.
And did they help with the hop picking?
Oh, they worked on the farm. Yeah,
Yeah.
so I should say that, shouldn't I?
Yeah, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, the prisoners of war. Yeah, they worked on the farm. They were farm workers. In fact, they used to come out. Well, he lived at the hill, so I don't know where he came from. Ledbury, I suppose. Bill Davis used to do the stringing. There was a hook in the middle of the hop root on the floor, and then there was the wire work was about 12 foot high, and there was a hook on top of the wire work, and he would put 2 strings up to the wire work and back down to the ground, and then along the top and then down again until he'd got to the end of the row. And then we used to tie the hops then, 2 or 3 to a string. Oh, before we tied, actually, we braced, and that was tying the 2 strings together. And then when they grew with about a foot high, we'd tie them round the string, and they'd incidentally only go one way. Opposite way to a kidney bean, they used to go clockwise. And this was the next job then, was leafing. When they got well up to the top, we'd strip the leaves off from the bracing strings down to the bottom, which was a very rough job on your hands. So we always wore gloves for that.
Tell me the one about, you know, your father lived in the hop yard, and the thing about the sulphur.
Oh yeah, yeah.
The leaves on the ash tree, if the leaf on the ash tree was still.
Oh yeah, well yes.
You ready? Yeah.
Yes, in the summer really, to keep all the bugs and whatever off the hops, because I mean the farmers practically lived in the hop yard to see if there were any disease coming on there. But sulphur used to be the main thing, which was you put sulphur in a contraption behind a tractor, and he used to get up about 2:30 or 3 in the morning and see if the aspen trees were still. If they were, he'd sulphur, and if they weren't, which were very rarely they were still, he'd go up through the hop yard and spray them with sulphur, because that seemed to be the only thing really to kill bugs in those days.
So I wonder if you could tell us why you think recording stories like this is important.
If you do, in fact, you might.
If you do, you might not, and that's okay too.
Well, I've recorded this story because I think it's quite interesting. I think my grandchildren, they haven't got a clue how we lived in those days. We rarely went to the seaside. We were happy at home. It's a totally different world, really. Yeah, I met Marsha at the Bromyard Hop Festival this year, and she showed me a photograph of, in fact it was John Pudge, my nephew, on the film. Do you want to do that? So I said, no way. But anyway, when I came home, I thought, oh, that's a good idea. I might write my history of growing up on a hop farm. For the future generations, really, because I don't think they've got a clue how we lived or how we worked. Well, I decided after I met Marsha that I would write a history of growing up on a hop farm in Herefordshire. Anyway, we moved to the hill, Stanley Hill, Bosbury, when my auntie died in 1953. The hill included 4 3/4 acres of hops, but it was a pole yard, which meant the poles were put in the ground each year and the hops were tied to the poles with raffia. This was extremely hard work, and the following bitter cold winter we put wire work up in the hop yard. It was my job to fix the hooks onto the top of the wire work and a contraption on top of a trailer pulled by a tractor.
Ah, that was perfect, wasn't it?
Janet, can I ask you about the children of the hop pickers?
Yes, well, of course, the children, they came along as well. I mean, people used to bring prams, and children were expected to sit in the prams all day, and they were quite happy in their prams. But yeah, the young, sometimes these sort of 8 to 12-year-olds, they'd go off picking nuts and blackberries and things, you know, on the hedgerows, or they'd pick, very often they'd pick into an umbrella on the side of the crib and then tip their hops into the crib to help the parents. But years later, I mean, you get children picking for their own shoes and things like that, really, for their clothes. Where today they're just expected, you know, it's just there, isn't it?
Very nice.
Very good.
I'm liking that.
That'll
That's very
touch a
nice.
few chords, won't it? I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, so then I'll ask you now about a wheat sheaf, and particularly if you can put in the mousetrap behind the cheese
Yeah.
counter, that's quite funny actually.
Okay, we're ready.
Okay.
You guys are.
So was there a local pub you used to go to?
Yes, the Wheat Sheaf at Froomes Hill. That was kept by Oliver Howe. He had a petrol pump and a shop. The shop was dreadful. Mary wouldn't go in because by the side of the cheese he'd have a mouse trap, and she was terrified of mice. But no, it was it was a one-off, to be quite honest.
Was there a pub you went to?
Yes, the Wheat Sheaf pub at Froomes Hill, which was only a couple of 100 yards from our back door, really. And the hoppickers used to go up there at night time, very often, and nearly always on the weekends, coming back singing. Oliver Howe, that kept the Wheat Sheaf, he had a petrol pump and a shop. In the shop, well, it was, Mary wouldn't go in it because he used to keep a mouse trap right by the side of the cheese. She was terrified of mice, would never go in the shop. Yeah, after, are you ready?
Yeah.
Yeah, after I married John Parker, we were actually at Hopton Solars for 38 very happy years. And unfortunately, the verticillium wilt finished us in hop picking, in hops. So we started doing apples, and we grow apples for Bulmers now. And our son, Farmer, and his wife, Catherine, and their 2 boys, John and Alex, live at Hopton Solars, and I'm now in the bungalow, which we call Solars Hill. And I've got my daughter married a hop farmer at Dilwyn, Edward Lewis, and so I go over there every year just to have my fill, well, my fix really of hops. I love the smell of hops.